Tenants continue to struggle with the lack of available rental homes coming to the market, whilst landlords are still trying to balance the increased income they're receiving with the rising cost of property management. Here is your rental market roundup for April 2024. Well, this month we're going to begin with the vital statistics that give us a bit of an insight into rental market activity here in Bath over the last month. Starting with the average time it took to let a property, which is 8 days, pretty much par for the course in this current market. If your home is sticking on the market for much longer than this, then please do seek advice. It's quite likely there's either an issue with the price or the way it's advertised. Due to the heightened competition between tenants who are trying to secure rental homes, it shouldn't take long in this market to find a tenant. Now, there are some exceptions to this, and much of it comes down to the type of property you've got. Apartments are letting quicker than family homes, for example. More on that in a bit. Moving on now to the average rent achieved in April. Now, this stands at just above 100% of the advertised rent, which is an indication that in some rare circumstances, tenants are still voluntarily offering above the advertised rent. Now, this doesn't happen very much, but again, it's indicative of that heightened competition for the available homes and tenants' determination to have their offer accepted. But as a landlord, if your property has been correctly and accurately valued, you should be confident of achieving the advertised rent. Now, finally, for the moment, we're going to move on to the average rent increase that we saw during April. So this is based on the point of relet. For properties that returned to the market in April, we're comparing what the old tenant was paying with what the new tenants were paying, which on average is 12% higher. I'm going to keep coming back to this again and again and again and again until I'm blue in the face, but this is all due to the shortage of properties coming onto the market versus the surplus of tenants who are trying to secure those properties. So we're still seeing these staggering rent increases at the point of reletting a property. It's no wonder that tenants are choosing to stay in their homes for longer, avoiding home moves where possible, because inevitably when they do so, they're going to be looking at paying a much higher rent. Now, I'm talking an awful lot about rising rents and tenant demand, but what does that actually mean? So to give a little bit of perspective, of the properties that we let during April, the one-bedroom apartments let for an average of £1,150 per month, and the two-bedroom apartments let for an average of £1,510 a month. And I'm giving you one and two-bedroom apartments because that's where the most dramatic rent increases lie. That's where we're seeing the bulk of tenant demand, which in turn leads to the highest rent increases. So one and two-bedroom apartments are in highest demand, and those are the rents that are rising most rapidly. You'll hear me talk an awful lot about the lack of available rental stock coming onto the market, but to give that some context, here is what I think is a very interesting chart which demonstrates the drop in property supply to the rental market over the last 5 years. You can see all around the country that available rental stock is down, and here in the southwest it's down by just shy of 38%. So that's 38% fewer homes coming to the market, and there's been no reduction in the number of tenants who are trying to secure those properties. So you can see that mismatch, and you can now see the consequences of that discrepancy between supply and demand. A quick update for you now on the Renters Reform Bill, which finally returned to Parliament in April for the long anticipated third reading. Now, this isn't yet close to becoming law. The bill still has to now pass through the House of Lords before it achieves royal assent and finally becomes law. But what was of interest in this third reading were the multiple amendments that were tabled to the bill. Now, I've picked out two amendments that I think will be of interest to most landlords. The first concerns mandatory periodic tenancies. This was the government's proposal that every tenancy from day one would be a month-to-month rolling tenancy. The concern for landlords was that it would leave them vulnerable to the tenant moving in on day one, changing their mind on day two, and moving out immediately, leaving the landlord having to relet and incur new costs. Well, the government has responded to this concern, and under the new amendments, every tenancy would be fixed for a minimum of 6 months for both landlord and tenants. So if the tenant changes their mind on day two, they would be tied into that tenancy for at least 6 months. The second amendment will be of interest to student landlords. There was a concern in previous iterations of the bill that there was no recognition of the student tenancy cycle. Well, amendments to Section 8 under these proposals will see this student tenancy cycle recognised and allow landlords of student-occupied properties to end their tenancies in line with the academic year. So that concern has now hopefully been resolved. In my eyes, these amendments do resolve concerns that most landlords had about the bill and hopefully will allay most concerns about the bill as a whole. Well, that's all for this month. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.